guys, welcome back to another video. Today is another exciting one. I've got this gorgeous Valencia Orange 1M. I'm out here in Germany continuing my German tour, and my good friend Sebastian T, who's an extremely good photographer, lent me his gorgeous 1M. There's a link to Seb T's Instagram below in the description. I've known Seb for years, he's a great lad, and this is his absolute pride and joy. So I feel very special being thrown the keys to it to do a video on it today. So cheers Seb, really appreciate it. I actually shot a video on a 1M a few years ago. Tony Lewis and Berry BMW gave me their white one, but I was limited with time, weather, roads, typical UK things. Today, well, I've got much better luck out here in Germany, so we should have more of a driving experience in this gorgeous car. The 1M was produced between 2011 and 2012, so a very short time period, and globally they produced 6,309 units. And all of those units were either Valencia Orange, black or white, although they did make a handful of individual colours, and I dread to think what those cars must be worth today. A quick refresher of what this 1M is all about. Under the bonnet we have an N54, which is a 3-litre inline 6 twin turbo unit, so very similar in layout to the one that's in the M4 that I have at the moment. In this car it produces 340 horsepower and 500 newton meters of torque when you're pressing the M button, which basically activates an overboost function. Otherwise it's running at 450 newton meters of torque. So impressive figures for a car this size and something that's 10 years old. A lot of people say this might not be a full M car or a real M car because it has an N54 engine, which is not an M engine, but it has been fettled with. And to me at least, this is an M car because of the way it drives and the way it looks. That power and torque goes through a fantastic 6-speed manual gearbox. It's the only option available when this car was produced, and that all feeds through the rear axle. So the rear axle is actually lifted straight out of an E92 M3 of the same era. So it's an interesting car. It's almost a parts bin sort of car that happened to work very, very well. This car is wearing its original 19-inch wheels in silver, which contrasts so well with the Valencia Orange paintwork, but it's not wearing the original rubber. You see, back in the day, this came with Michelin Pilot Sport tyres, which were good in sunny weather like today, but they weren't the best, and tyre technology has moved on a long way over the past 10 years. So Sebastian has actually put Trofeo R's on this car. And the reason he's gone so extreme is he literally uses this car on nice summer days. It's not a garage queen, because when he takes it out properly, but it doesn't come out all times a year, and you would not be running it on these tyres during the winter months. Okay, quick look around the cabin. Before that though, we're going to start it up because it's really warm in here. So you put the key in the dashboard and then press the starter button. There we go. It's quite loud on a cold start, but once everything's warmed up, it's actually not particularly loud, this car, which is strange when you think that it's 10 years old and there was no sound restrictions back then. But still, as we'll find out, it's a lovely, raspy, typically BMW inline 6 sound. In terms of this cabin, well, it's very E82 1 Series in here. The layout, the size of it, it's very narrow compared to modern cars, let's say. Even compared to my M2, it's quite narrow in here. But it's a lovely layout. There's a lot of M stuff in here. So we've got Alcantara with contrasting orange stitching in the doors and the dashboard. Above the instrument cluster here, the instrument cluster themselves are really nice. They've got like a grey surround, which was very M period when this car was around. We've even got an iDrive system in this car, one of the earlier systems, but it still looks quite familiar. The graphics on there, they look a bit dated, but still fresh enough. But I am 42 years old, so maybe that's going to be different for someone of an 18-year-old that jumps in here. The steering wheel itself, well, it's got M stitching, and there's an M button on there, as we talked about on the outside. That M button actually gives me 50 newton meters more torque, No idea why you just don't have that maximum 500 Newton meters of torque all the time. But it's a bit like the E60 M5. You used to have to go into the menu for that to bring it from 400 horsepower to 507. Why you just wouldn't get 507 each and every time you turn it on, I have no idea. Looking down here, well, we have a beautiful BMW M gear stick, which is basically identical to the one that's in the brand new G82 M4 that I'm driving around in at the moment. And I think that's really cool. As I talked about in that first drive video, I love the fact that the gear stick in that ultra modern car harps back to older M cars like this, that's basically 10 years old. In terms of driving position, well, it's pretty good. It's not perfect, I'm sitting quite high, but I wouldn't say it's too different to the driving position in my M2 competition. The seats, well, they're actually very similar to the M Sport seats of the time. I believe the 135i Coupe had very similar seats. These might have a slight bit extra bolstering. They also have the orange contrasting stitching and an M badge in the headrest. I mean, that must add at least an extra 10 horsepower. Right, the next thing we need to do is go and find some good roads and take this car out for a drive. Right, here we go, on the road in the 1M. This is Seb, the owner, next to me. Yeah, Seb, I couldn't be more grateful. This is a fantastic opportunity. And before we start, a bit like when I got the M4 manual recently, I just want to put my hands up and say I'm not the best at driving a left-hand drive manual car. A number of reasons for that. Firstly, you use your right hand to change gears, and I know that sounds fairly simple, but it's a bit like asking a right-handed person to write with their left hand, initially at least, so it takes a bit getting your head around. Then when you factor in trying to heel and toe with fairly big shoes on, well, it all becomes a little bit tricky. So excuse me if I don't drive particularly well on this segment, because, well, I'm just here to enjoy it and I'm bringing you lot along for the journey. This particular 1M has only done 16,000 kilometers, so that's 10,000 miles, which is just incredible if you think about it. It's coming up to 10 years old and it's only done 1,600 kilometers a year, basically. So it's pristine condition. Now, I've been running around doing all of the external flyby shots as Seb's been driving up and down. So I've had a good listen of this car from the outside. In fact, I've probably heard a lot more than Seb's ever heard of his own car. I guess so. And it sounds epic from the outside. It's actually quite subdued in here. It's loud enough, but there could be maybe 10-15% a bit more volume, couldn't there? But anyway, let's just talk about what this car's like. Well, firstly, we've got a hydraulic steering rack, so it initially feels quite heavy. Remember, we are on Trofeo R's, and Seb pointed that out quite quickly to me, saying that they've obviously added a little bit of steering weight to the car, but you can just feel everything. It's just such a nice rack. Sounds like I'm talking about something else there, but it really is. It's the way it loads up in corners, you know, you just don't get that feeling, even with an E-Pass system from Porsche, who I believe make the best. Even with those guys, it's still nothing like a traditional hydraulic steering setup. Power delivery is just epic. There's a lovely slug of torque, really nice. We're third gear here, 1800 RPM, start picking the throttle up, picking up, foot on the floor. Oh, it just pulls you out of here. Such a great engine, it really is. Mighty. Yeah, figures might not look that impressive by today's standards, but with both of us in here, boot full of camera gear, this thing absolutely flies. Oh, it's just brilliant. It struggles to put the power down. Now, I'm in MDM only. If it was my own car, I'd have everything switched off, and Seb's said I can do what I want, but the value of this car, I don't know these roads, I wouldn't do that, but it seems to deal with it pretty well in MDM. when you put all of the traction aids on, i.e. when you jump in the car for the first time, the default setting, they do restrict you quite a lot. That's when you realise you're in an older car, because traction control systems have got so much better these days. I'm not going to test any 0 to 60 times, and I'm not going to burn Seb's clutch out, but nice bit of straight road here, so let's just give it a little bit of wheelie off the line. Here we go. First gear, see, traction control. And there we go, now we've got traction. Oh, it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. You don't necessarily get rewarded for revving it all the way out in this. It seems to have a sweet spot, I would say, between about 3,000 and 5,000 RPM.
Linear power delivery, so.
Yeah, that's where the torque and the power seems to be. You can rev it out, but it doesn't need to. And I really think that suits the manual gearbox in this particular car. It really does. You could just be in 5th gear, put your foot down, lovely wave of torque. It has more torque, or at least a feeling of more torque, than my brand new G80 M3 competition. That below 2,000 RPM is just, there's nothing there, really nothing. Whereas this, 2,000 RPM, put your foot down, give it a couple of seconds. It takes a while for the turbo, or the turbos, to spool up, but when they do, it's a great feeling, really nice. Something we need to talk about as well is the ride quality, and I remember talking about how good the ride quality was on that white 1M that I tried a few years ago. And that was on really bumpy British roads as well. The ride out here is amazing. It feels really expensive, the suspension. It's totally stock, and actually while we're talking about that, this 1M, aside from the Trofeo R's, is completely stock, right? Like out of the factory. It's in beautiful condition. The engine bay, everything is just immaculate, but it's completely stock. So a lot of people change the brakes that we were talking about earlier. A lot of people change the exhaust or do a few things to it, the suspension, but this is bone stock, and I think it's better for it. It's a real nice bit of kit that's come out of BMW M as they wanted it to come out, you know, as they set it up to be. And I think with this sort of car, if I had one, I would keep it stock. I guess I need to share some comparison between this and my M2 competition, because a lot of people say the M2, especially the original, was basically the replacement for this car, and then the M2 competition was the more recent car, and they do share a lot in common. This definitely feels a lot smaller on the road. It's got a tiny little bonnet that sort of curves away at the front, so it's really nice, quite a pointy front end. I haven't pushed this hard, so I can't tell you what it's like on the limit, but I can tell you that it feels like it's not as capable as an M2 competition. It's not as fast, doesn't slow down as well. Front end's not as good, I guess, as planted, but you get more feel through the front end because of the hydraulic steering. And when you do load it up through a corner, it just feels great. It's quite soft on its springs. It rolls for an M car, especially if you're used to modern ones, but it doesn't roll too much. It gives you a nice feeling, and I actually talk about that in some of my videos, where when the car's got the suspension that keeps the car completely flat, so something like an RS6 or something, I think that takes a lot away from the feeling of the car, and it kind of takes away any clues as to when your traction's about to run out. So a bit of roll is good, and I think as a road car, that roll translates to really good quality ride, and that's really important. It tracks very well through bumpy corners. Oh, it just tightens up this corner. And off we go. I guess it's only also fair to compare it to the G82 M4 that I have in manual that I jumped out of this morning. Now that is another generation again. That makes my M2 not feel slow, but the front end on that G82 is so mighty. and it would absolutely destroy this car along a road like this. But most importantly, are you having more fun in the modern M4? Wow, they were flying. And that's the question that I ask myself a lot, and that's why I've always said hot hatches are great fun, great road cars. Older sports cars like this are just brilliant road cars, because there are speed limits on roads. There's only so fast we can do on a road, on a public road, that something that's really capable, like the G80 and G82, when you get it out on a road like this, you've really got to be going some to get the car moving around. So I guess that's kind of a good summary. Yes, my M2 competition is faster, more modern, more capable than this, and then the M4 again is another step up. But along a road like this, that doesn't mean you're going to be having more fun in those cars, and in fact it's kind of the opposite. You potentially have more fun in this car and at more legal speeds. It's just a little riot, this thing. Absolutely love it if I can get the gear changes right. Just so nice through these flowy sections, isn't it? The way the car moves around, the way it loads up. I'm sure these tyres are really helping as well. The grip levels are, well, ridiculous. Fantastic car. Guys, I'm going to slow the pace down now and end this video. Unfortunately, I could spend the entire day and an entire tank of fuel burning up and down here in Seb's beloved 1M, but I'm not going to, because I need to give him the keys back and I need to head off to the Nürburgring. Seb, thanks so much for throwing me the keys. Yeah, honestly, mate.
It's fun to share the pleasure.
It is, and that's, you know, that's how I feel about things. But it's very, very generous and nice of you to let me drive this, because I know it is your baby, and it's great that you use it properly, and it's great that I got to use it today. So guys, remember to check out Seb's Instagram below in the description, where there'll be plenty of pictures of this beautiful car. And yeah, I'll see you at the next video very, very soon. Take it easy. Cheers.